Okay, good morning. Today's daf Yomi is Moed Katan daf Hey, but we're going to start on the very bottom of Daled on the base, around 10 lines from the bottom, where the Gemara cites the Mishnah, where the Mishnah says Metaknin is a mekulkalos b'moed. You're allowed to go out to fix the mekulkalos. The mekulkalos are like the channels of water that were messed up. So I'm a Rabbi, my mekulkalos. The Gemara, I know what you're wondering. The Gemara is wondering the same thing.
Wait a second, which water? What kind of
water that they were bringing to irrigate the fields. So what are these mekulkalos? So Amar Rabbi Abba Shem Haisa Muka Tefach Mamid Al Shisha Tefachim. That if it was water that was a furrow of water that was one tefach deep, they originally it was 6 tefachim deep, but it got filled in, so they could dig it down and make it 6 tefachim deep again. So that's what Rabbi Abba says you're allowed to do. You could go down the 5 more tefachim to get it to 6 tefachim. So Gemara says, Pshita, it's obvious to us that if it was chatzi tefach al shlosha tefachim, but if it was just a half tefach by 3, and you want to go dig down to 3 tefachim, that's not going to be okay. Kivin lo avar mayim lo kumhu. So since the water is not going to pass through it, you can't do that. That's how Rashi understands it, because you're basically bringing it. You're still not going to be able to get it through, so you're doing work for no reason.
Waste of time.
It's a waste of time. And tefachayim al shnei masar, and also if it was 2 tefachim deep, and you want to dig it to 12 tefachim deep, which would allow the water to really pass through freely, but that's not going to be okay. Because then you're digging down and all the way down to 12 tefachim. That's a lot of extra digging, so that's not okay.
What constitutes tefachim?
A tefach is a handbreadth is 3 to 4 inches. Tefachayim al shiva. So then the Gemara asks the question: what about if it's 2 tefachim deep, and you want to go down to 7? So we had said, Rabbi Abba said they could go down to 6 from 1, so that's a distance of 5 tefachim. But now you want to go from 2 tefachim to 7. It's also a distance of 5, but you don't really need to 7. 6 is sufficient. So what's the law? So I asked the Gemara, on the one hand, you're both going down 5 tefachim, it should be okay. Or maybe since you have an extra tefach, that here it's more than you need, and so therefore it's too much tircha. So the Gemara says teku, which means we are leaving it unresolved. We leave this question unresolved. And by Yisharu of Nei Bar Hamdach, Abai allowed the people of the city of Bar Hamdach Nahara to clean out their rivers, meaning to say that there were blockages in the rivers, and Abai allowed them to get rid of the branches that were growing there so that the water could flow freer on Chol Moed. Rabbi Yomi Sharu of Nei Sachvasa, he allowed the people of the place called Sachvasa Mechar Nara Tamima to dig and to clear out the rivers that were closed up because of all the junk that was in the rivers, and that was stopping the water from flowing. Rashi Sharu of Nei Mata Machasya, Rashi allowed the people of Mata Machasya Laktuche Nahar Bornitz to widen up the hole where the river Bornitz, so that it could really flow freer. Even though that this was a tremendous tircha, he allowed it. The Amar Kivan Deshasu Minei Rabim, he said, since a lot of people use this, a lot of people are benefiting from this river, Kirabim Dami. And it's like basically literally means since the people are drinking from it, therefore it's the needs of the community. Utanan Osin called Sarchei Rabim. And we learned you're allowed to do all the needs of the community on public. So now the next line, the Mishnah, it says Mitaknin, you can fix a Chol Moed as Kakui Amayim Sheba Rishus Rabim. The broken water sources in the public domain. You're allowed to fix that on Chol Moed. So the what does this mean? The Gemara says, what does it mean you can fix the mekulkalos? We're on the top of 9a, the very top line. So the Gemara says, Chatita in Chafir Lo. What you're allowed to do is you're allowed to filter it, take out the rocks and the pebbles. And you're allowed to take those out from the mekulkalos. That if they were in the well, but you can't dig a new well on Chol Moed. Chafir Lo, you can't dig a new well because presumably that's going to be too much work. Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So what says Rabbi Yochanan? Lo shanu el shein rabim tzricha. This din that you can't dig a new well, that's only when the community doesn't need it. Amar rabim tzricha, but if the community needs it, I feel chafir mutar. You're even allowed to dig a new well. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan said you can't dig a new well if the community doesn't need it. But if the community needs it, you could dig a new well. That's what he says. So says the Gemara. Gemara says, let's analyze this statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Gemara is going to introduce three brises that seemingly are contradicting each other until we get to a resolution. Gemara says first, if the community needs the well, is it really actually permitted? Is it really going to be permitted if the community needs it? But we learned, that you're allowed to filter out Borosh Shichon Morosh Shal Yachid. You're allowed to filter out the pebble. The Borosh Shichon Morosh is a standard terminology for like these reservoirs of an individual, and for sure of the community. You're allowed to filter it out. The Ein Chofer Borosh Shichon Morosh Shal Rabim, and you're not allowed to dig the reservoirs for the community, and for sure not for an individual. So remember, what was Rabbi Yochanan's law? Rabbi Yochanan says that if the community needs it, you can dig it. But what's that? Even if the community, we had said chafir lo, and Rabbi Yochanan said that was only she'ein rabin tzricha, when the community doesn't need it, then you can't dig it. But if the community needs it, you can dig it. And so now we're asking, if the community needs it, are you allowed to dig it? But we learned in this price, it says that you're allowed to filter it out, but you can't dig it. And even for the community. So what's the scenario in which this price is talking about? Isn't it talking about a case, and isn't it even talking about a case where the community needs it and you still can't dig it? So this is a refutation of that teaching. Because Rabbi Yochanan said that if the community needs it, you could dig one. So the Gemara says, no, what we're talking about here is, no, b'she'ein rabin tzricha. No, when the Brisa says you can't dig it for the community, it's when the community doesn't need it. The Gemara says, wait 1 second. Well, if that's the case, we have to say that's the same thing by an individual. So when we say by an individual that you can filter it out, does that mean that even when they don't need it? Vatanya, the kavasa gaba yachat shein yachat tzarach chatata mishari. Would you be even allowed to filter it out for an individual if nobody needs it? You can't do that. Vatanya bar shiklam marshal yachad. If you have an individual's reservoir, individual's water well, kones in mayim, you're allowed to bring the water into it. But you can't filter it out. And you can't fill out the cracks. But if it's the community, it's but for a community, you can filter down and fix the cracks. So we see for a community, for an individual, you are allowed to do it, but for an individual, we say so what must be that case? And it can't be that case must be where he doesn't need it. And so we see if where an individual doesn't need it, it's not allowed. So must be LMI, must be that the case where it's allowed for an individual is where an individual needs it. And the kavasa gabe rabim, and so too by the community, where the community is we're not allowed to dig. It must be gabe rabim, misharabim tzrichalam. So we see from here. So we see from here that where the community needs it, it's still prohibited. So the Gemara says, but it can't be. Would you really say that where the community needs the water, it's prohibited to dig? But we haven't learned. And now we have the third brisa. If you have an individual's reservoirs, and you can filter it out. So an individual's water wells, you can bring water into it and chotetin osan, but you can't fill out their cracks. Or we change that verse, chofrin osan, some say. You don't dig it, and you don't plaster it with sin v'shara. So we see from here that you can do the individuals are chotetin, we're filtering it out. V'sharabim chofen osan v'sadin osa b'sin. But if it's a community, you can dig the well. So we see from here that for community, you can dig the well. So which is it? But we have this contradiction between the third source, which says that in a community you can dig it, and the first source, which says your community can't. So how do we answer it? So Tara Tachi. So now this is the resolution of all three sources. That you're allowed to filter out an individual's water or an individual's well. If the individual needs it, you can filter it. For sure, if the community needs it, you can filter it. When the community needs it. Because even digging a new well is mutter, is going to be permitted when a community needs it. However, where the community doesn't need it, you can't dig it. And for sure, in individuals, you can't dig if they don't need it. Because if an individual doesn't need it, even filtering it out is also prohibited. So the upshot of all this is that an individual is only allowed to filter if he needs it. A community is even allowed to dig if they need it. If they don't need it, they can't dig a new well. The Brisa says left ambiguous. Can the community filter out the water even if they don't need it? They leave that a little bit ambiguous. Rashi says all this that we just inferred from these three Brisas as a way of making a resolution. All this is actually masnisin nami deika. We could actually infer this also from our Mishnah. So how can we infer this from our Mishnah? Dikatani, because we learned in our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, Osin kol tzarchei rabim. You do all the needs of the public. Kol, when it says you do all the needs of the public, asuye mai, what's it coming to add? Lava asuye chafira. It must be coming to say that you're even allowed to dig for the community. So the Gemara says, no, it's not. Maybe it's not coming to add digging a well for a community. Lo asuye hadatanya. Maybe it's coming to include the following brisa: yotzin lekavei tesadrachim, that you're allowed to go out to get rid of the thorns that are in the community. If there are thorns on the road, you can get rid of it. To clean out the paths, to clean the thorns off of the market, and to measure the mikvos. We call mikvah shein bo arba'im seah margilun lasocho, and any mikvah that doesn't have 40 seah, you can bring the water into it so it becomes kosher mikvah. Uminayin shem lo yatzu v'asu es kol elu shekol damim shenishpachu sham ma'ohem hakasav kilo hem shaflim. And how do we know that if you have all these things and you don't go out, then anything that happened, it's blood on the hands. It's first in Deuteronomy that the blood will be upon you. Here, that's what it's coming to include. It's not coming to include that you're coming to dig a new grave for the community. It's coming to include all these and get rid of the thorns, make sure the streets and the markets are safe. Umar says it can't be that's what it's coming to include. How about Hedjikatani law? That's listed explicitly. Metakminas hadrachim v'esarachovos v'esamikvos v'osin kol tzarchei rabim. So if it says metakminas hadrachim, it says you fix the roads and the streets and the mikvos. So when it says v'osin kol tzarchei rabim, it says you do all the needs of the community. What's it coming to include? Must be it's coming to include must be it's coming to include that you can dig even a new hole if you're the community. Shema mina. So Rav Ashi says indeed our Mishnah has inferred that we can infer from our Mishnah that you're allowed to dig a new hole, a new water well for the community on Chol Moed. So now the next line in the Mishnah was mitzayinim esakvaros, that you're allowed to mark. You're supposed to mark the graves on Chol, and you go out even on Chol Moed to mark the graves. So what's the reason why we need to mark a grave? If we don't mark a grave, they didn't have cemeteries like we have then. People were just buried wherever. They're buried on the side of the road, and then people could come in contact. If you touched a dead body, then you became tamei. But even if you didn't touch a dead body, if you were just over the dead body, if the dead body was under a tree, and you walked under that tree, that would be considered like ohel mace, like the dead body was under an ohel, a canopy, and that's called canopy of the dead body, and that's also considered tumah. Your own body can become a ohel mace, If you are over the dead body and you're under a tree, then you're also going to be also included in that tumah. So therefore, we need to mark the grave so that people don't inadvertently pass near a dead body and become tameh from what's called oel amaze. So Amar Rabbi Shimon Pazi Remez L'Tzion Kfaros Min Atar Minayin. How do we know that you need to mark the graves, biblically speaking? But it's a hint to it from the Torah. It's not literally from the Torah. It's a hint to it from the Torah. So the Gemara says, Tam Lomer Urei Etzem Adam Uvaneh Etzlo Tzion. You shall see the bone of a man. It's from Ezekiel, and build a sign for it. And Amar Ravina Ravashi. So he says, Made the Lacy Yecheskel. Ravina says to Ravashi, so I believe that I'd have to check, but I think that the next time this also appears, when this appears in it appears in Tainus, that is also Ravina says to Ravashi there, but I have to check. But Ravina says to Ravashi, well, before Yecheskel came, Man Amar, who how do we know before Yecheskel that you're supposed to mark the graves? This is a verse from Yecheskel. So the Gemara responds, and according to your logic, that this thing was not taught by Moses, but we learned about Ezekiel, which states, anybody who's not circumcised cannot come into my temple. Before Ezekiel said that verse, how do we know that an uncircumcised person can't come into the temple? We know they're not allowed. So it's a tradition, and Ezekiel just found the support for it in the verse. We knew it as a tradition from a Moses at Sinai, and Ezekiel found the support for it. So too here also, it's a tradition, and Ezekiel just supported it. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Avo Amar Mehacha. Rabbi Avo found a different source for this idea that you have to mark the grave. He says from the Metzora, a person who has leprosy, that you would go out and he'd shout out, Tame Tame Yikra. He says, I'm Tame. He would call out, stay away from me. Tuma Karlo, Vomeris will approach. He calls out Tuma and he says, I'm Tame, stay away from me. So we see he's supposed to mark the Tuma and stay away from it. The Gemara says, that can't be to teach us this, to mark the grave. We need that to teach us Tame Yikra. Why does the Metzora say he's Tame? You need to tell people you're in trouble so that everybody can pray for you to have a healing, to have mercy. That's why Tame Yikra is called out. The Gemara says, no, Imkein Lichtov Vitame Yikra. If that's the case, it should be called out, and he will call out Tame. My Vitame Tame. Why does it say it twice? Shmas Minatarti. We see both things from here. Both things. We see the idea that you need to tell people about a grave and also to ask people to pray on your behalf. This is a very powerful idea. Somebody who's in trouble should ask other people to pray for them, ask the rabbin to pray for them. Abai gives a different source. Before a blind person, don't put a stumbling block. You don't want people to become tamei. My Papa says, so panu derech. My Papa says, clear a path. This is the Haftorah for Yom Kippur from Isaiah. Rabbi Soloveitchik said, I remember reading, I don't remember where, but I remember reading from Rabbi Soloveitchik himself that he wrote that this is the difference between the Haftorah for Yom Kippur and the Haftorah for all other fast days. Haftorah for Yom Kippur, all other fasters, we say to a person, Dirshu Hashem Himatzah, seek out God and you'll find him. On Yom Kippur, we clear the path, we allow the people to have an easy path back. So upon Rav Chanina Amar from here, Harimu Mechshol Miderech Hami. He cites the verse from Isaiah, from the end of that verse. Harimu Mechshol Miderech Hami. Rav Yeshua Bered Ravidi says, "Vodato emas haderech asher yalchu ba." Another verse, this time from Exodus, and so Marzutra says, this time he cites the verse from Leviticus. And Rav Ashi says, this is the verse from Leviticus, you shall guard my ways. Guard my ways for my mitzvahs. Ravina says, now we cite the verse from Tehillim chapter 50, which says in the pasuk, V'sam derech ar'enu b'yesh elokim, that one who marks the road will see the salvation of God. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he says, even though it says hasam derech, one who makes a mark on the road, he changes it to sham derech. He changes it from a sin to a shin, meaning to say one who evaluates their ways That one who evaluates their ways is going to see it. How do we see it? It says, whoever evaluates their ways, whoever is always looking at themselves and saying, am I doing this the right way? Or making really close analysis of every action they take, they will merit to see the salvation of God. As it says, with some derech, you should evaluate your ways. And we'll see the salvation of God. Rabbi Yanai had a Talmud, a student, every day Rabbi Yanai would study with the student. The student would ask Gavaldik Akashas. He would challenge him, and he would really sharpen the learning as a result of this. But all of a sudden came time for the big drasha on Yantif, where everybody came, not just the yeshiva bachars. On that day, the student of Rabbi Yanai would leave him alone. He wouldn't ask any questions. Why? Because he didn't want to embarrass him. So Rabbi Yanai said, he said about this person, Misham derech hareinu b'yesh Elokim. Or at the top of Hey and Mabez, he says, somebody who evaluates his ways will see the salvation of God because he's so careful with his ways and he doesn't want to embarrass the teacher in front of everybody. That's how you know he's going to see the salvation of Hashem Yisparach. So now that we've established that, it's a mitzvah from the Torah, not mitzvah from the Torah, but there's a remez, there's a hint from the Torah to mark the graves. Just before we go on, we were studying a little bit, but prior to the Daf Yomi, between when davening ended and when the daf started on Zoom, and we saw that there's a lot of mystical ideas to marking a grave. The Gemara is only talking about marking a grave to prevent you from becoming ritually impure, but we saw that in the Arizal we talked about the tombstone is a place where the soul can have an inhabitant on this earth, have a place of living on this earth. That's the importance of a tombstone. So somebody trying to ask something? Okay, so Tanu Rabbanan. So now since we're talking about the fact that you become ritually impure from touching a dead body, but not only from touching the dead body, but even from being in the canopy of the dead body, meaning under the tent of the dead body. So that's called Oel Amei. So now so we want to make sure that you don't do that. You don't accidentally do that. So the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan. We have the brisa that cites this Ein Mitzayan, and when we mark the graves, you don't have to mark it all kazayis when you don't have to mark it's just an olive-sized amount of a dead body. Well, etzem kasoro, not if it's just a bone the size of a barley corn. Well, davar she'eino mitame b'ol. You don't have to mark for anything that's not mitame under a canopy. Those are the minimum amounts you have to mark. If it can become tummy under a canopy, you mark it. But otherwise, you don't have to mark it because we're not worried you're going to touch it. Because you'll see it. We're just worried that you're inadvertently going to come under a canopy with it. Like what could be a canopy? A tree, for example, could be a canopy. And then if there's a dead body under the tree, then you're tummy without even realizing it. But we are mitzayin in ala shidra. We're mitzayin on a spine, vala gogoles, or on a skull, or al rov binyan, or if you have the majority of the mass of the dead body, val rov minyan, majority of the bones. Mace, then you mark it. Also, you don't have to mark if it's a certainty that there's a dead body there. Like if it's a cemetery, you don't have to mark every grave because you know that it's there. You mark it if it's a doubt if it's there, because then the people don't know. These are the ambiguous cases that you have to mark, or the unclear cases. The Gemara is going to say what those are. And a base pras. These are three categories, which the Gemara is going to get to in a few moments. You don't place the mark directly on top of the dead body, because then you're going to lose. Why do you not want to become tameh? Because you don't want to lose the taharos, the food that was pure, and now you touch it, you can't. It's tameh. Or you don't want to lose the truma, for example. So if you mark the grave itself, it's too late. You have to mark it before. But you don't mark it too much in front of the ritual impurity. Because then we're going to lose too much land from the land of Israel. You just exactly the right amount, not too much and not too little. So now the Gemara analyzes this source. Why do you not mark it if it's an olive-sized part of the dead body? But really, kazayis min ameis, an olive-sized portion of the dead body, is exactly the definition of what is metame, of what causes ritual impurity in a canopy. But we learned explicitly in the Mishnah in Olos, these are the things that are metame, that are causing ritual impurity in a canopy. And what are those things? Kizayis from a mace, an owl-sized portion from the dead body. That is the minimum of what does cause ritual impurity in a canopy. So Amar Papa Hacha bekazayis mitzumtzum askinan. To sof milchsar chaser. Mutov yisrafu olav truma ukachim afishav al yisrafu olav olam. So Rav Papa's answer is, yeah, we're talking about exactly the right amount. And so therefore, but we shouldn't mark it. Why? Because we know it's going to decompose within a few days. And when it decomposes, it's going to shrink. So we don't want to mark that place forever as some place that causes canopy tumah because it's not the right amount. It's only the right amount for the next week. So for the next week, we'd rather somebody become tameh than forever people start burning their truma in that circumstance. So we want to say no. Don't mark it if you know it's not going to be like that in the long term. So now the Gemara asks the question: the Elohein Sefekos. These are the ones that are Sefekos. What are the Sefekos? What are the Sefekos? What are the cases that we're not certain about? Sechachos u'Faraos. The Sechachos or the Faraos. What's the Sechachos? Ilana Meisach Hawaris. If you have a tree that's spread out over the ground, and so therefore there's a dead body under there, but you wouldn't know, so you mark that so that people know not to go under that tree. And what are the Paros? These are Avanim Peruos. These are like stones that are jutting out. They jut out from like a hedge. And so there's the dead bodies underneath it. So you want to mark it so that people stay away from walking under that stone. What's a beis pras? Pras literally means like the break. So, or a piece of it. So a beis pras, you have to mark that grave because what are we talking about? Keditanan, like we learned in the Mishnah in Olos. What does it say? Beis pras, hachoresh es hakever. That if somebody plows over a grave, he turns this grave in this field into a beis pras, where you have to be concerned that there's tumah there without you realizing it. And how much of that field now has become this beis pras? Miloma on that, like the length of a plow's furrow, which is Mea Amma, 100 Ammas, approximately 150 feet. So if you plowed over an area where there's a dead body, you have to go the extension of each time before the plow turns, which is approximately 150 feet. And so therefore we say anything in there is doubtful tumah, so mark it so people know that they don't go in there. The Gemara says, but wait, the beis pras, mimetame ba'ol, beis pras, does that make canopy tumah? We know that there's a dead body there, but the body's been crushed. So does that is that going to make you tummy by an ohel, by canopy? Shmuel taught you're allowed to blow on the ground before you walk in the beis pras to make sure there's no dead bone, there's no dead body in front of you, so you don't touch it. Meaning to say you're only concerned about touching it. You're not concerned about canopy tumah. So why are we concerned about canopy tumah in a beis pras? Rabbi Yehuda Barami Mishmei Deula says beis pras nidash tower. He says even more, if the whole beis pras was turned over, was plowed over, it's ritually pure. So it means to say that you don't have to worry about canopy tumah. So Amar Papa says, okay, I'll tell you why. Because there's two types of beis pras. There's three types of beis pras, but it refers to different terms. Lokasha kamis sadesh avabakever. Kamas Sadesh and Nefresh Bakever. Beis pras can refer to a field where the grave was plowed over, and there, yeah, you can't have canopy tumah there. The field, the body is crushed up. It's only if you touch it that it's tumah. But it could also refer to a grave where you lost the dead body. You don't know where exactly it's buried, so that is doubtful tumah. You mark it because you don't know for certain where it's buried. So the Gemara says, with Sadesh and Nefresh Bakever, Beis pras karle. If a field is plowed over, do you still call it a beis pras? The Gemara says, yeah. In Vatanam, we learned in the Mishnah. We learned in the Mishnah in Olos. Shlosha beis pras. The Mishnah tells us there are three types of things that are called the beis pras. What are the three things that are called the beis pras? One is Sadesh and Neva Bakever, a field where you lost the grave. Sadesh and Nechresh Bakever, a field where the grave was plowed over. And three is the stei bochim. The crying field is also called the beis pras. And what's a stei bochim? My stei bochim. What's his crying field? And that was a field where they would transfer, the people from one town would transfer the dead body to another town to go bury it somewhere else. The time of Mai, why is it called the beis pras? Why is that field where they transfer the dead body called the field where you have to be worried about ritual impurity? So because what happened was, they were transferring the bodies, and there was a lot of parts to the bodies, and sometimes they fell out. They didn't have coffins, so sometimes a piece would fall on the ground, and the owner would just say, "Okay, I can't find it." So therefore, there could be body parts in that field, to stay away from it if you don't want to become tamei. So the Gemara says, okay, we've established that if the field was plowed over, you said you don't need to mark it. Why not? But then we learn but didn't we say that if you find a field that's marked and you don't know what the nature of this field is, if it has trees in it, then you could say that since then if there's trees in it, you can assume that the grave was plowed over, and yet it's still marked. So if it was marked and there was but if there's no trees in it, so we see from here, if there's no trees, then we know they lost the grave. But if it's marked and there are trees, that's an indication that it was plowed over, because after you plowed it, you planted the trees. So Rabbi Yehuda says, and Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says, Achi has Sham Zakin o Talmud. He says, no, it's not enough to make a sign from the fact that there are trees there. You need to know that there was a reliable person who says where the dead body was. So we see from here, because he says not everybody's expert in the matter. But anyway, we see from here that if you have a field which was plowed over, and then there were trees, and there was a sign on it marking it, that even though there were trees, we know that you're supposed to mark the grave to show that it was plowed over. So the Gemara says, Amar Papa, Kitanya besada sha'ava b'kever. Did Sayuna, that what we're talking about is that the field was a field where there was a dead body there, and we lost the dead body. We don't know where it is. Did Sayuna, and if it's marked, Yesh Ba'ilanos, and if there are trees there, we know that it was plowed over and you could walk through it. But if there are no trees there, there are no trees, then we know that they lost the grave. So the Gemara says, but why would trees be sufficient thing for us to rely upon? Maybe the grave is outside the trees, and the trees are on the inside. So the Gemara says, no, where the trees are at the border with the public domain. So therefore, everything on the inside, since the trees are on the border, so we say everything outside the trees in the public domain, and for sure they didn't bury the dead body there. So for sure they buried the body near the trees, and then they plowed over the grave for the purpose of the trees. So the Gemara says, but maybe the tumah is outside and the trees are on. And maybe the tumah is inside and the trees are outside. And so maybe basically the grave was lost on the inner part of the field, not where the trees were planted. The Gemara says, no, but Mesubachim. We're talking about trees that were interspersed throughout the whole field. No, and this is what we taught. No, we would never put the sign far away from the grave. So therefore, you don't have to worry that the grave is in a different part. Yeah, I'll be happy to take any questions.